In the 14th century, a thriving alpine settlement went suddenly, deathly quiet. For 7 consecutive years, not a single word was whispered, not even a single cry was heard. They didn't lose their tongues or go dumb overnight. They had instead taken a vow of total silence that was absolute. It led to their total decay. But they weren't the only ones. From a secluded convent that forgot how to speak and began to meow like cats, to a village so convinced they were made of glass that they refused to touch another human soul for fear of shattering. Today, we look at 3 places where people started behaving abnormally and descended into collective madness. These are the stories of the towns that totally lost their minds and went full psycho. I am Vestige. Don't look away, the madness is contagious. In the early 14th century, a small mountain settlement in the Alps was struck by a chain of disasters, such as violent storms, avalanches, crop failures, strange lights in the sky, and sudden death of livestock and people. To the people, this could only mean one thing. They saw it as the wrath of God, and the heavens were angry with them. The local priest then proclaimed that the only way to appease the heavens was through total silence and repentance. They said prayers and sacrifices won't work. The solution was total silence. The entire settlement then swore an oath. They agreed that no one would speak for 7 years. Not a single word would be said in their homes, in the fields, and even at funerals. Think about the psychological weight of that. Mothers would be able to sing their babies to sleep. Lovers won't be able to say their goodbyes and confess their love for one another. Market women merchants would have to trade in rhythmic taps, hand gestures, written symbols, and other unconventional ways. Children were punished if they made noise, songs, laughter, and conversation vanished. Witnesses from nearby villages described the place as a town of ghosts that still moved. People would stare at visitors with wide, unblinking eyes, their mouths clamped shut so tightly their lips had begun to pale. Over time, the silence became more dangerous than the storms. Misunderstandings led to accidents. Families drifted apart. Several villagers went mad. Some fled from the settlement. By year 5, the village had developed into a state of collective catatonia. Most of them had forgotten the sound of their own names. When the vow was finally lifted in 1355, many found they literally could not speak. Their vocal cords had atrophied, and their minds had retreated into a dark, quiet corner from which there was no return. One chronicle says a woman screamed during childbirth, and this became the first sound in years, and the village believed this broke the curse. Soon after, the storms reduced, harvest slowly returned, and the silence vow was ended. They interpreted this as proof the heavens had been satisfied. If you thought 7 years of silence was very disturbing, think again. The events that unfolded in a secluded French convent in the mid-19th century will make you question the very wiring of the human brain. This is the story of when a house of God turned into a house of predators. It all began with a single nun, a woman who had dedicated her life to the quiet service of God and the church. One day she began to meow like a cat for no apparent reason. She didn't scream. She didn't pray. She just stood in the center of the church, looked her mother superior in the eye, and began to meow like a feline creature. At first, the other nuns thought it was a temporary illness, perhaps a brain fever brought on by the intense isolation of the convent. But within 48 hours, the sound had multiplied. 2 sisters joined her and begun to mew like cats also, then 5 sisters. In the twinkling of an eye, the entire convent were all mewing like cats. Imagine walking past a convent at midnight. You would expect the sound of Gregorian chants or the soft hum of prayers. Instead, you hear a chorus of dozens of grown women, huddled in the darkness, screeching and yowling like a colony of stray cats. This wasn't just for a brief moment. They did it every single day for hours. The villagers became terrified. They believed the convent had been possessed by demons who were trying to stop the work of God. The church tried everything possible to stop this madness. They conducted exorcisms. They used forced labor, even starving the possessed nuns so as to make them stop. Nothing worked. The more they tried, the louder the meowing became. The madness only ended when the military was called in. The soldiers lined up outside the convent with whips and muskets. issuing a final, brutal ultimatum. They issued a warning that the next nun to meow would be flogged until she couldn't stand. The threat of physical violence did what hunger and holy water couldn't. The meowing stopped instantly. Not a single word was heard from the convent. The sisters quietly returned to their duties, but they never truly spoke again. The psychological scar remained and haunted them forever. While some people lost their voices and others behaved like animals, this story involves a group of people who lost their very meaning of humanity. In the late Middle Ages, a terrifying glitch known as the glass delusion began to shatter the sanity of Europe. It started at the very top, with King Charles VI of France. He didn't just feel fragile. He was 100% convinced his body had turned into hollow, transparent glass. He would refuse to sit down, or would only sit on specially reinforced furniture. He had iron rods sewn into his clothes to prevent his body from breaking if he moved too fast. He lived in a state of constant, paralyzing terror that a single hug, a handshake, or even a stumble would leave him as a pile of broken glass pieces on the floor. The most disturbing part of this phenomenon was, it began to spread. Soon, commoners were found walking through village squares with their arms tucked tightly against their chests, moving with the agonizing slowness of a porcelain doll. Some would sit for days, refusing to move, or, in extreme cases, would sit by the fireplace, fearing they were melting, or that their limbs were already turning into fragile, clear glass. Others would wear extra clothing, wrap their legs in soft materials, or request to be placed in beds with soft cushions to prevent their body from shattering. They lived in a world where human touch was no longer a comfort, but a death sentence for them. For years, these people existed as living statues, living a lie their brains told them was the absolute truth. If you thought the story of people thinking they were made of glass was laughable, what happened in Tanzania, now known as Tanzania, proves the human mind is still a fragile glitching machine. On January 30th, 1962, at a girls' boarding school, 3 students suddenly began to laugh. At first, it seemed like ordinary teenagers being mischievous. But the laughter didn't stop. It continued for hours, then turned into days. It wasn't a giggle. It was a violent, rhythmic heaving that was accompanied by tears, pain, fainting, and respiratory problems. Within weeks, the laughing plague had spread to 95 of the 159 students. The school was forced to shut down, but the madness followed the girls home like a communicable disease. In the nearby villages, parents, teachers, and even total strangers began to collapse into fits of uncontrollable laughter. Imagine the horror of a father watching his daughter laugh until she vomits, laughing until her ribs ache, until she is gasping for air, only to find himself beginning to chuckle along with her. It wasn't sounds of joy or happiness. It was a physical assault. People were crying, screaming, and flailing their arms and legs, all while their mouths were locked in a terrifying, wide-eyed grin. The epidemic lasted about 1.5 to 2 years, with the laughing plague affecting around 1,000 people living within a 100-mile radius of Bukoba. Although no deaths were recorded, schools were shut down. Half of the people were unable to speak. Most were unable to work. The episode caused widespread disruption throughout the country. As people, we like to believe that our minds are our own, that we are in control of our sanity. We aren't just individuals. We are part of a collective network, one that can be hacked or glitched by a single thought, a single look, or a single sound. It reminds us of a terrifying truth that Vestige explores every day. We are only as sane as the person standing next to us. When the collective mind decides to break, there is no medicine, no prayer, and no logic that can glue the pieces back together. If you're still here, it means your mind is still your own, for now. To stay shielded from the next glitch, join the Vestige Circle by hitting the subscribe button. Tell me in the comments, which of these events would break you first? And which one do you think is already beginning to happen again in our modern world?